This is Tyler, your antisocial critic and the host of the AntiSocial Network, your number one source for anachronistic conversations online. Come join us each week to hear opinions from some of the best voices discussing entertainment, politics, religion, and modern life on the internet today, most of which you've never heard of, but I have. This week we are joined for, I believe, the second time, actually the first time on this iteration of the podcast, but we are joined by Tyler Smith of Battleship Pretension. He's a film critic and film professor from out in LA. How's it going?
Oh, it's going okay. Is this the second time? What's the first time?
I think you were on when I was still doing the audio only version of this. So it was,
okay.
I started doing video about a year and a half ago. So it's been revamped, but yeah, this is the first time on video. So,
oh boy, I wish that I guess just made a number of lifestyle changes like 5 years ago, so that I didn't look like this. But here we go. I wish I'd worn my not Charlie Brown type shirt.
I mean, don't we all regret that? Really, it's not just one of us. I had Bill Ryan from The Bulwark on 2 weeks ago, and he said the exact same thing. He's like, "Why do you want to see my ugly face?" I'm like, "It's a face."
You know, it's the craziest thing because at Battleship Pretension we do a Patreon, and at the very top tier you get video. That's the only advantage to the top tier subscription. There are a number of people that have it. And it's like, I don't know why you want to look at me and David. We look at almost exactly alike. You know, the official podcaster look. You've got it too, which is glasses and beard, and just kind of an increasingly dead-eyed look. But people go for it. People do, for whatever reason, people like to see who's talking. I think certainly facial cues can help people, but it's an odd thing. People do seem to like it, much to my surprise.
I imagine it's an element of the parasocial relationship, which, you know, the idea that when you watch someone online, you're developing a kind of one-way relationship to that person, which makes discussing things with people that you don't know very awkward because they have all this emotional context you don't have, but I also don't have fans, so, you know, that doesn't really bite me on the butt all that much. So,
all right, well, you know, one less thing to worry about. That's what I say.
Yeah.
Mo fans, mo problems. That's what they say.
The ideal, rich in fame, not having fans. No, I'm kidding, but.
And there is also the idea that, like, when people listen to you for a long time and then they see you, for whatever reason, you're never what they pictured. And there was someone who, they weren't necessarily taken aback by the fact that I have tattoos, but they really were not ready for it either. And so it's like, oh, okay, sorry about that. I would have consulted you if I'd known it was going to be such a big deal.
Well, it depends. What are we talking about here? Are we talking about the tramp stamp? Are we talking like full back tattoo? Or
I have a rosebud tattoo from Citizen Kane, and then I have my kids' names and birthday on both wrists.
Okay, so we're not talking about anything egregious here. So
no, well, I do have sort of like American History X. I did have a swastika on my chest that I had, but I had to get that removed.
I was gonna say you could always do that thing where you like put another a tattoo on top of it so that it like becomes a bigger tattoo. You know, well, it
turned into a giant chessboard on my whole torso.
All right, so enough stalling then, I guess. But you kind of said you wanted to come into this with talking about film criticism specifically, and I was kind of curious what angle you wanted to hit that at, because obviously you have your entire film career is based on film criticism. So I was curious what was on your mind on that.
Well, okay, so you're a film critic and so am I, but that's not the only bit of commonality we have. What else do we have? We've both written for various outlets, including Daily Wire, because we are both politically right-leaning, which is, I would say, rare in the film criticism community. Not unheard of, but it doesn't pop up much. And it's something that increasingly, it's definitely something that Andrew Clavin has mentioned, and a few other people as well, that like really lamenting the lack of conservative voices in film criticism, and that's on both sides. That's the frustration with like the critic community sort of being a little bit insular in its politics, and maybe not having a lot of room for other people to join in, but also within the world of conservatism, there does seem to be, and of course I'm painting with a broad brush. There are exceptions, of course, but you know, when I go on Facebook or when I go on, really, I mean, any social site that, or I'm part of a group that is right leaning, and movies come up, I would say a limited perspective presents itself very quickly, as far as what a movie is, what a movie can be, certainly what a movie should be, to say nothing of any discussion of awards, any discussion of analysis. And that's it. And that's if you're talking about the movies themselves. Like sometimes people can't even, sometimes fellow conservatives won't even get that far. They'll literally just say, I don't like the person that's in this, and thus I would never see it. And it's something that increasingly frustrates me, because I am, and I actually also have been in a situation where I've gotten in conversations on Facebook, always a bad idea, but sorry, I thought they were conversations. Turns out they were not. They were debates, and I didn't know it. But I've had people like question my conservatism because of my view on film and my approach to film. And it's like I genuinely, the thing that I have been saying is like, I don't understand why opposition to a federal minimum wage is somehow should be able to keep me from approaching some of the deeper elements of film as an art form, or even seeing it as an art form. And then in actuality, there is no barrier except the one that conservatives put up themselves. So more than anything, I just felt like complaining with you for a while. It's one thing for me to complain about this on Battleship Pretension, which I often do, but my co-host, who's also a very good friend of mine for many years, he politically is almost exactly the opposite of me. So he's definitely on my side, but from the outside. And so I was curious to know, yes, from a cathartic standpoint, I'm happy to compare stories and all that sort of thing. But I would also like to move into like, what role does conservatism have in the discussion of film as an art form? So all very light fare, that's very easy to get to the bottom of. That's what I had in mind. So take it away.
Hold on, I need to start down in the beer real quick.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
We need the real opinions to come out here. Film critics gone wild.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, gloves off. It's hard to actually kind of create the kind of spaces where really good film dialogue can happen. I mean, obviously they exist, and I can list off at least 5 or 6 film critics on the right that I think are legitimately great. My Twitter colleague Hannah Long is very good. Bill Ryan's very good. Sonny Bunch is very, very fun. Christian Toto's great.
Yeah.
What's his name at Breitbart that used to do film reviews? He's fun, but there's also
not John Nolte, is it? I don't like John Nolte.
That's fair. I mean, I used to read his film reviews. I don't know if he's up to something I'm not aware of, but
okay.
But just for the sake of saying his film, I liked his film reviews. But my
sure.
my point is that there's a lot of good film critics out there that are very thoughtful and have an understanding of the form, and actually takes time to go back and learn about it and learn about how it can function as an art form. And then when it comes down where the rubber meets the road, you tend to meet kind of two minds. One is the completely anti-art, the anti-art or anti-film conservatives that essentially they've just given up on the entire art form and they want nothing to do with it. They don't care about it. They don't care about celebrities. They don't care about the form. They think it's not useful in the culture war and they don't support it. Or at best, they have a television subscription so they can watch Turner Classic Movies. But
Sure.
And then the other end is the populists, which I'm using that term generally, is in people who, they go see Marvel movies, and then that's it. Like their entire film consumption is based on whatever's the big blockbuster, and when I meet them, they tend to be very frustrated with the overall state of film because they generally don't feel like they're getting anything rewarding out of Hollywood right now. And I noticed that I talked to him, was like, oh, I haven't seen a good movie in years, not since like Mad Max. I'm like, have you watched movies other than like the big one that's actually been released in all your theaters? I mean, are you just watching the Marvel stuff? Is that it? Are you just watching Marvel and Star Wars? I mean, I like Marvel and Star Wars, but they're not the whole of my cinematic reference. I haven't felt... I didn't... Like, even at the height of COVID, when nothing was coming out, I didn't feel like I went a month without seeing something relatively new, because I had avenues by which to see something new constantly. And even when that was just junk, like, it was still something new. Like, I felt like the industry was continuing to move, and it wasn't more than a few months before movies came out. And even in the slow years, I feel like I always have more than 10 films to consider for my best of the year list. Yeah. And so when it comes down to actually talking to conservatives about film, you wind up with people that either just have no engagement with the art, or they have a very low engagement with the art. And that's not to say that there's anything, morally deficient about that, because, some guy that goes to the movies on the weekends for fun, that's not a bad person, but it's frustrating in our position just because we understand that this thing is more powerful than they're giving it credit, than either one of them is giving it credit for. It can be useful for more, and it is being used actively against us. So it's very hard to actually just say that it's just film. It's not. It's an art form. It's very hard to find a way to use it nowadays in a way that's useful for us. But it's there, and it's powerful, and it's something we can't just continue to leave not acknowledge.
I think what gets me when I think about this, it's so overwhelming because it's hard to even know what the entry point is, because there's this idea that you use the term avenues, and I think that's a really good way to approach it, which is there are these different roads you can go down, and if you go down this road, there are so many resources for finding movies that aren't just the biggest possible thing Hollywood has to offer. But you and I know about that because we just got into film and took it seriously, and thus when those avenues are not presented to us, we will seek them out. I would suggest that it's possible, and I feel that I agree with you. I don't want to denigrate people for whom movies are purely entertainment and they just have other interests, and this is something they occasionally engage with. That's fine. We all have our thing. I don't care about sports one iota. But for some people it's their whole life, and so they would undoubtedly look down. They could look down on me for my general ignorance and lack of interest. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't want to do that, but I do think that I think there are probably some people for whom they don't even know that there are other avenues, like the movies that they are being presented with at like the AMC multiplex, as opposed to like a smaller chain or a more independent theater, whatever it is. That's it. That's what movies are. And the idea of watching an older film or an independent film, or certainly a foreign film, that they might view it with suspicion if they view it at all, like the concept of that being a genuine possibility. I have run across people who film is solely what you're talking about. It's solely Marvel and Star Wars and Disney, I guess, is what we're talking about there. But like, and so it's hard to know, like, okay, well, how does one try to like ignite a curiosity about film in someone enough that if they are unsatisfied with the mainstream and what's being presented, that they put in the effort. Not that it's a lot of effort, because you know the internet can give you a lot, but how does one inspire that the curiosity I think maybe formed in somebody like you and me naturally when we were younger, probably teenagers? How does one inspire that in someone so that they don't despair about what film is and what it can be? I don't know if there's an answer.
I don't know if there is. I don't know if there's a direct answer to this question. I mean, I'm somewhat reticent to bring up the specter of anti-intellectualism, but I do think it's useful in this particular context. There's a good video by Dan Olson where he talks about the movie Annihilation and how that movie brought, like, if you showed that movie to someone who just goes to movies for a pure cinematic experience, a lot of people found that very wanting, because it's you know it's full of weird plot holes and contrivances and coincidences. But he points out, this is it, that as a story about pain and identity, it is a perfect film. But and it's a really good way to kind of bridge the function where a movie can interact intellectually, but also kind of draw out apathy from a general crowd, because you and me, we think about these things holistically. We think of it as every individual film is a complete work of art from beginning to end. It is complete, it is full, and it is trying to draw some inner depths. Whereas I think a lot of people tend to view the art form as a puzzle to fix. They want something that's they kind of want their film to be a Wordle puzzle that they can work out and help them burn off excess calories in their brain. And it kind of encapsulates that divide between us as people. Not to say I'm an intellectual. I'm not an academic, but but as people that are engaging with the ideas behind the thing versus someone that's apathetic to the thing. And it's frustrating for us because there's energy in the experience for us, and when you're trying to negotiate with someone who's apathetic, you're arguing against a wall. Nothing gets done. You're arguing with someone who doesn't, they're not comprehending your perspective. They're not comprehending where you're coming from on these on a story, and it's very hard to kind of translate the headspace of one person to another in a way that makes the thing fully emotionally resonant in the way it is to you or I.
Yeah, it's I think maybe some of my frustration with all of this maybe starts with the fact that, like, for the last few years I've taught at various colleges, but also I would teach high school students getting college credit. So it's all through the college system, but it's different age groups, but all of them are young. Like, all of them are 22 and below, so still formative years. But the schools where I teach, like, there's no real film department. Like, it's all under the humanities banner, and so there are people who just want to get a humanities credit, and it's like, oh, a film class, this is going to be super easy. And don't get me wrong, I try to make it as easy as I can, because I don't want to give them an academic excuse to turn off. Like, more than anything, I just try to spark conversation. And I'd say, people engage, but there are some that engage more than others. Usually about like 4 or 5, especially at the younger age. Like, this last semester, I taught high school freshmen getting college credit and taught a film history course. And there were a couple people who emailed me, a couple students at the end of the semester who emailed me and said, I had no idea. Like, I had no idea that there were movies like this out there, that this is how movies evolved over time. And I love the movies that we watched, and I'm excited to watch more. And that being able to it's sort of evangelistic in that way, like making somebody aware of this thing and how much better this thing can be and how much deeper this thing can be, to such an extent that they may not, once they're aware of it, may not want to go back to what was. That is very invigorating, and it's very exciting, and I feel like I'm doing something for them. And so to see that kind of excitement and openness with my students, who admittedly have put themselves in a position to learn, so there might be some level of curiosity there, only to see people who I know are intelligent, and just to see them completely close off from the idea that film could even be anything more than entertainment. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with entertainment, but even within entertainment, there are artistic choices being made, all of them, in fact. But yeah, it's very frustrating to me, because it's such a difference between, these students who are still developing as people, and as opposed to people that I know that are older and more mature, and hypothetically should, as they're more mature, should be more able to engage with the intellectual side of themselves and the intellectual side of any kind of discussion. But that is definitely not the case, and I would say especially on the conservative side. And I think maybe that's the thing that frustrates me as well. It's like, I enjoy the conversation you and I are having. I'm enjoying that because I do know that, yes, we both love film, but it's also kind of nice to know that, like, I can reference a certain economist, or I can reference a certain concept and not have to like tense up because I know you're not going to agree with me. It can be nice to be around people that agree with you, because I spend so much time very much in the other way, which is fine. I think it's good to be around people that don't agree with you, but it can be nice having the shorthand and not having to like bristle every time I bring up something that could be even vaguely conservative.
Yeah, I mean, and that definitely helps to find people out there that are, I guess they would call it high trait openness would be the psychological term for it, because that's the part of you that kind of is makes you perceptive to people and their psychologies, and makes you more than anything makes you interested in them. I mean, part of being a film writer or a film critic is just being interested in a certain kind of depth of humanity to people, and there's a lot of people for whom stories are essentially just, like I said, they're puzzles. They're something that you want to work out in your head. They're not a thing that necessarily brings out something deeper within you, which is why I think so many films in the last 20 years, I sent you my my essay on film consumption, and I was as I was writing that, I was struggling to think of films that have come out recently that actively changed something about my personality or changed something about the way I look at the world. And I've seen plenty of great works, and I love a lot of the great artists of the film history. But I'm like, most of what I see coming out of the way people see films is people see films that affirm them, or they see films that release endorphins in their head. I'm like, and it becomes very, very hard to actually, explain how film can be an actual useful medium when people are only engaging with it on that level. I mean, I think when the film that probably meant the most to me of everything I've seen, I mean, the one that kind of inspired me to want to get into film deeper was when I saw Hugo back in like 2011, and I was just like still in high school at the time. And at the time, it was like the first. It was the only Scorsese film I'd seen at that time, and it actually kind of brought out something within me. I was like, I don't know what this is, but it's I want to go deeper into this, and it just kind of set me on the path where I wanted to understand this medium, and so I started seeing film constantly and seeking things out, and actually giving the medium a chance. And I can tell you at least a dozen films that have come out since that I think are challenging and interesting, but it's actually very hard to think of how how to use this medium in a way that's actually, brings that out of people. I mean, that one film hit me at a moment in time where I was susceptible to it. I'm sure that's not the case for everyone, but I'm sure that most people who do get to the point where you and I do, they have that film that kind of drew something out of them. But it's not something that the average person necessarily wants.
Yeah, you said something that sparked something in me. I was in high school, and in my English class we had watched read Catcher in the Rye, and I read it, and I thought it was very interesting. I'd not read anything like it at that point in my life. And the teacher, after we had finished reading it, because we sort of discussed it as we went, she took like a survey of the students, as opposed to in regards to like our reaction to it. And so it was like, I liked it, I didn't like it, and then there are a couple other options, and then there was one option that said, I don't fully know what's going on here, but I like it. And clearly, I mean, that was many years ago at this point, and clearly that stayed with me. The idea of a teacher giving you permission to not have the entire work figured out, but still allowing yourself to have a reaction. And the fact that the two, can work together. Because I do think that a lot of people in general, but I have also encountered this within the conservative community, that if a film is not straightforward in its storytelling, in its imagery, whatever, if it's not straightforward and cannot be easily comprehended, then it is just dismissed as artsy fartsy or pretentious or whatever it is. And I do think that, like, yeah, there are some films that are just so, they hit you maybe at a certain time in your life, but also as you get older, and you're more open to that. Like, there are still movies like Paul Schrader tends to do this for me, like First Reformed, and then I saw the Card Counter this year, or last year, pardon me. That we're just like, oh, I'm not 100% sure what this person is trying to say. I have an idea, but I don't know 100%, and that's okay. What is it getting me thinking about? Let's start there. And I do think that like in my experience, that attitude of I don't know what that's about, is something that is often derided in the conservative community. Like I remember a few years ago, I feel bad coming down on him in this way, but you know what? I think he's going to be fine. I remember Ben Shapiro about Hell or High Water, and he loved it. But one thing that he went out of his way to say was that it was like No Country for Old Men, but not weird. And saying that, like, when he saw No Country, it's like the story's over and then there's still 20 minutes left, and he's like, well, that doesn't, the story is over. So why are we still watching? It's like, I don't know, Ben, why are we still watching? Maybe actually, rather than use that as a rhetorical device, actually follow that question. Why are we still watching? As Tommy Lee Jones is processing everything we've just seen. And clearly, like, there's a tone in my voice as I'm talking about this, but I do think that, like, therein lay the difference. Hell or High Water, I liked it quite a bit as well. And it is a lot more straightforward as opposed to something like No Country. They're very similar movies. I'm sort of glad that Ben Shapiro brought them up in regards to each other, because I do think there's a different approach. One is a little bit more existential, whereas one is a little bit more down to earth. And I've run across stuff like that before, where people just say, like, such and such made no sense, and that's where they leave it. That is, for them, a criticism. That is, like, if it made no sense, it must be bad. And I don't remember where I was headed with this. Oh, I guess just the idea of, like, there are movies that come out pretty much every year, I'd say, that I can't necessarily figure out in any kind of objective sense. I can figure out, like, how it made me feel and what it made me think about, and maybe use that as sort of an entry point into what the director might be trying to do. But yeah, I feel like that concept is viewed as a negative by a lot of conservative movie watchers and commentators.
Yeah, but that's also something you're just going to find in the general populace, is a general antipathy towards ambiguity. I mean, I think that there's something to a filmmaker taking his reader or viewer into a very opaque and unclear place and then ending it on an unresolved note. I mean, I know lots of people that would say that that's postmodern or, nihilistic or empty, but a lot of that's just kind of create a space where something strange could happen. Like, I think, like, I had problems with a new Paul Thomas Anderson movie, but I think that was a good example of that. Where it's a movie that's... I don't think Paul Thomas Anderson, for all of his criticism, was actively promoting hebephilia, which a lot of people did, but...
Right.
Which a lot of right-wingers went after that movie very hard. And I've never heard anything about Paul Thomas Anderson that isn't, he's a decent family man who just likes cocaine too much. But
well, who doesn't?
Yeah,
I have twin boys. You do what you got to do to get through the day.
I'm a poor journalist. I just snort coffee, but
yeah. Oh, what do you think? What do you think I sprinkled in my coffee to keep myself going?
There you go. But like that movie in particular, I mean, it's opaque, and it's hard to actually understand what the film is trying to say at times in regards to what in regards to the story it's trying to tell. Where it is clearly trying to be this very innocent feeling love story, but it's also it also acknowledges the fact that this is a love story between two people that by all means shouldn't be together, and
not merely for age purposes.
Yeah,
they might feed into their individual worst instincts.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated, but it's also very hard to kind of get people in the mindset where a movie like that can be emotionally revealing. And like, even for myself, there's a lot of movies like that where I see it once and I'm just like, this isn't making the neurons in my brain fire. Like, I remember I saw the card counter, and I loved First Reformed, but the card counter didn't really work for me the same way that First Reformed did. Probably just because I thought it wasn't as well directed as First Reformed was, but I could definitely see watching it again and getting more out of it. But even as someone who does care about the intellectual side, I'll have experiences all the time where I'll watch something heady and interesting, and it just, it goes right over me, and it just doesn't stick in any sort of way. So it's not like it's just something that a normal person who's not engaged in this experiences too. We're talking about people where art it's complex and it's designed to bring complex reactions out of people.
Yeah, and with I think the maybe unspoken assumption that those reactions are stemming from some level of engagement with the material, as opposed to simply having a sort of a prescriptive attitude towards what a movie is. And if the film simply isn't that, it doesn't matter what it is, it isn't this thing, and so why am I even bothering? And yeah, it's I feel like I'm being extremely negative, but I guess that's the nature of this type of discussion, is that, like, and I'm sure some people would consider me and maybe you as well, just a snob, like anybody who views movies this way, and which is why I think it's important to say that we don't look down on people that don't view movies this way. Like, this is my whole life. Other people have, I'd say, more substantive lives, insofar as, they're saving lives or something like that, as opposed to being like, oh, I just saw Jackass Forever. That's what I did, except I didn't do that. You did that.
That's a whole thing. That's a whole can of worms to open up right there. I am curious,
as someone, because you've never seen anything Jackass related, right?
Oh, I've seen some of the TV show, so I knew what I was getting in for. I knew this wasn't going to be super extreme, but I also knew it was going to be really gross. I'm like, okay. I mean, I'd say my reaction was mixed. I didn't hate it. I didn't necessarily like it. I laughed a couple of times. The audience generally liked it, so I can't really like hold that against it in any sort of meaningful way. But you know, I didn't need to see that many testicles in one night, but I did. I mean, what are you gonna do? It's, you know, I also just don't like the cringe. You know, especially like the scenes where they have like bugs bite people and stuff. So.
Ugh. Ugh. Yeah, I think the thing that because I am a little older than you, and so Jackass was something that was talked about quite a bit when I was younger. And I watched a little bit here and there. Usually what I liked about it had very little to do with the stunts and more to do, I know this sounds so ridiculous, but the sense of camaraderie amongst the people involved. Like, you really do sense like it is very much like you and your friends like daring each other when you're younger, except these guys are at this point much older.
Yeah, I mean, there was a distributor there, and she was asking for comments, and I didn't quite know what to say about the film when I was coming out of it, so I just told her that she asked for a quote, and I said weirdly wholesome, and that was in reference to that, you know, these guys who just kind of love each other as brothers and do all this insane stuff together. I mean, and obviously a lot of it's, you know, extremely staged and supervised to the point where it's probably not as dangerous as it looks. I mean, they kicked what's his name, Margira, off of the set because he was on Adderall. So it's not like these are people that are completely insane. These are people that are, you know, they're thrill seeking, but they're thrill seeking in a fashion where they're not 100% of their mind and trying to kill each other. They're just, you know,
right.
If someone dies, it'll be completely incidental.
Yeah, and I mean, they certainly have hurt themselves a lot.
Yeah,
like irreparably in some cases. Like, oh, that's lasting. That's going to be their entire life. Like, oh, that tooth's not coming back or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think Steve-O was missing a tooth.
Yeah. and I seem to recall that Knoxville I think like had a colostomy bag after a while. Like he like knocked something loose, obviously, and had that for a while. And so I think there was like a YouTube video of him going through like all of his like major injuries. And it was like, it's astonishing. But you know what? Here's what's interesting. I was watching a documentary made by the at this point late Peter Bogdanovich about Buster Keaton, and I'm a big silent comedy fan. I have a specific soft spot for Harold Lloyd. For some reason, he's the one that I like the most.
I was gonna say, if you're worried about us being too pretentious, please enjoy our conversation about Jackass. But keep going.
Yeah, but you know what? I'll bring us back into the world. You know, movies from 100 years ago at this point. But yeah, so Bogdanovich interviewed all these like film people and stuff, and it was just so fascinating to hear the way they talk about Buster Keaton. Then he interviews Johnny Knoxville, and it's like, if anybody is uniquely qualified to talk about Buster Keaton and what he could do physically, it is somebody like Johnny Knoxville. Like, these directors, they can talk about his ability as a filmmaker, which was, you know, pretty amazing. But as someone who, like, Buster Keaton once broke his neck and didn't know it.
Yeah.
You know, like, well, that sounds like, it's like, who's the equivalent of that these days? Oh, I think I know. And Knoxville talks about how, like, in one of the Jackass movies, it starts with that classic stunt of like the front of the house falling down, and it's about to crush him, but he's standing where the window is. Like, that's a Buster Keaton bit, and so he recreated it for one of the Jackass movies. And so he was talking about like how terrified he was. It's like, this is a heavy thing, and if I'm standing, even if the calculation is off, it's like, I'm actually dead. He goes, and Buster Keaton did that constantly, all the time. And sometimes Buster Keaton would just like, he would do a stunt knowing, like, I'm going to hurt myself. That's the only way this is going to work, is if I hurt myself. So it's like, my arm's going to be pulled out of joint, but boy, this is going to be an amazing little stunt that I did. And so even something like Jackass, it does scratch an itch that we've wanted to scratch since the silent era. Apparently, it might be a little bit more crazy, and with the exception of Harry Langdon, you didn't see as many testicles as you were talking about. Langdon, he was a crazy guy, but so it is fun. Yeah, and to me, that's one of the fun things about knowing film history is not merely understanding the references, but understanding how the stuff we like now is really not that different. It might be in its execution, but at its core, it's really not that different than the stuff we liked 100 years ago. And that gives you a certain degree of perspective about humanity and how it both does and does not progress in its sensibilities. But certainly Jackass gets you a sense that maybe we're not progressing so much from being children.
There's nothing new under the sun. Like this, like
exactly.
Even a new art form, like everyone pretends that an art form, ebbs and flows, but it figures out what the core of itself is, and it kind of just goes off of that for as long as it exists at that point. I mean, film is a miraculous medium, and there's a lot of ways you can contextualize it as as a way of communicating, but at the end of the day, the same thing sells 100 years ago that the same thing sells now. It's, weird sex and violence, and that's not new.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is as fun as it can be to be kind of snobbish and look down and on people who don't think the way you do, which I don't think we're doing, nor would I recommend, but it certainly plays into a certain unfortunate pride that a person can have. But when it comes right down to it, I do enjoy just a well-made popcorn movie. Like my wife and I the other day were watching Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, which is the 5th one, and that thing is airtight. That is such a beautifully executed action movie where every sequence they wring every possible action beat out of it, so that it's like, all right, so you can't say that oh, you know what, I wish they'd done this. Like, no, they did everything you could possibly wish them to do. And by the end, you're like, man, this thing was astonishing and required every bit as much commitment as a First Reformed or something like that. It just scratches a different itch. And so I absolutely don't have a problem with somebody enjoying just the pure like popcorn movies. I like them too. But at the same time, usually it's pretty rare for a film like that to like work its way into like my personal top 10 of the year. Not because I don't like it, but because while it hits me on an instinctive level, there's not much that I'm left thinking about afterwards. Like, it doesn't stay with me. And the movies that stay with me are usually the ones that are my favorite, partially because like, hey, I'm making this list at the end of the year, and if a movie doesn't stay with me, I'm just not going to remember it. But I was curious to know, and I know that we can get back to talking about sort of the political nature of things. Have you made like a list of like your favorite movies of 2021, or is that something you do?
I did, yes. It was, I had it out like on the 2nd, so it's been out for about a month now. Okay.
I'm sorry that I did not see it.
I can pull it up if you want me to like read it off.
Let's do it. My family and I were all actually fighting COVID at the time, so and thankfully we're past it. But we were all just trying to sleep and take care of the kids at the time. So I unfortunately have not been really engaging much with online content, except like starting a few days ago.
I was going to go back on your previous point, but I think part of the reason why you and I can appreciate something like Mission Impossible at the same time that we appreciate something like, First Reformed, is because our analytical value sets are hierarchical in nature, where we you and I can both put something into proper context and understand what its pure value is based on what it is and how much it deserves to be valued, and then fully enjoy it to the extent that it deserves to be enjoyed. I mean,
Sure.
I mean, back in like 2020, I put Capone on my favorite movie of the year list, which it is a terrible movie, but I really liked it because I understood exactly what it was going for, and that had everything to do with the fact that I have a lot of personal experience dealing with dementia in my family, and I'm like, Josh Trank, for all of his grotesque obsessions, is someone that actually seems to understand like what the inner experience of memory loss is like, and I don't know if this is something that's like happened in his family, but he gets it. And I saw it in this movie, and I'm like, okay, I see the design. It doesn't work, but the design is super interesting when you actually see it, like, in my head. And I wrote a good piece for Rebel Media about that. But at the same time, like, you compare it to something like A Hidden Life, which I contend is one of the best movies of the past 2 or 3 years.
It was my favorite movie of that year, yes.
Almost inaccessible by the average person, but it is a spectacular film. And part of what makes it interesting is just how much space it creates for all these intense ideas where, you know, it's a very floaty movie. Like, it doesn't always, like, it's not always clear at all times what every scene is trying to say, and there's all this, like, pondering and existential angst, and every scene just kind of has this, like, open space where it, like, lets you think through the implications of everything that's happening. And, like, I remember the movie kind of crystallized for me during the scene where he's about to be executed, and it's just this grueling 5-minute sequence where it's a guy sitting in line knowing he's about to be executed, and I'm like, yeah, this is Tarkovsky-esque. Like, this is about a guy's relationship to time and every moment that happens in between these moments. And there were, what is your where it's like a character is grappling with the nature of salvation and morality and everything that's happening. And then but the ironic thing was, like, when I read all these reviews by, like, leftist critics, they're all just talking about it, how, like, it's an Antifa movie. It's like, it's a movie about why Nazis are bad. I'm like, that.
Like, yeah, they're not great, sure. And you know what? For the first hour, I did see a lot of sort of low level, like, anti-Trumpian type populism, and I thought, like, oh man, is this going to be all that? Like, for 2.5 hours? But it's like Malick is, he thinks bigger than that and deeper than that. That's there. If that's all you want, that's there. But I think it's so much more than that. It really is about the way what bravery can look like. And I love the way the film regularly talks about how, like, what does this stance mean if no one knows about it? It's literally just you and me. And I don't like you, and I'm going to kill you. And it speaks to this larger thing that I think Malick increasingly is interested in, which is like, yeah, but God's always around too. And as they said in Man for All Seasons, like, not a bad audience that. And in the end, like, being true to yourself and being true to God, ideally those things would be the same thing, but, like, that's really the only thing you have. And if someone just doesn't, going back to Man for All Seasons, like, and yeah, there could be, like, genuinely lethal consequences, but if you give that up, then what are you left with? Nothing, really. You're left with survival, but that's probably it. Like, you yourself, there's not much to you. And I think the movie Silence, Martin Scorsese's Silence, explores some of that as well. And I think that's, this can get into some of our, the other side of the stuff that you and I have in common, which is, I feel, obviously, I think most filmmakers are left-leaning, if not straight up just full-on leftists, and I certainly know a lot of critics are. And because I almost feel like because it's so plain, and because there is that bit of commonality between them, I often feel like certain left-leaning critics, when it comes time to analyze the movie, they settle at maybe the most superficial interpretation of a film or superficial level of engagement, like with A Hidden Life. There are yes, certainly the film doesn't make Nazis look great. Not many movies that do, you know. I believe there's Triumph of the Will, and that might be it. And so like, so it's that, and it's like, oh, and then you look at the timing in which it was made. It's like, okay, 2019, so maybe this is his anti-fascism, his anti-Trump film. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, that's the specific story he's telling, but you can extrapolate all kinds of things from that, like having an unpopular opinion, which incidentally, like, what can that get you these days? You could possibly lose your job. You could certainly be deplatformed, demonetized, whatever it is, but you have to be true to yourself. Like, that's also something that it could be arguing. But I feel like, you know, it's that Moneyball quote, like, when you get the answer you want, hang up. And I feel like with a lot of movies, leftists get the answer they want immediately and they stop engaging after that. I'm painting with a broad brush. Obviously, like, there are a number of like critic friends of mine who are left leaning and they adored that movie and for much deeper reasons than others. And so, yeah, I do. I try not to think of things purely through a political lens because so many other people do. And so if someone I know that is left leaning, or leftist or whatever we want to say, like, when they approach a certain movie and it's just clear, like, they're seeing it solely through their lens and feeling very happy about it. It bums me out a little bit. I guess the same could be true of like Christian films with, you know, reviewed by Christian critics. Yeah, it always bums me out. I don't like when people are comfortable being pandered to.
It goes back to my idea from my artist pornography essay that, you know, what is art that doesn't actually challenge you? I mean, my favorite bad cliche from, you know nothing film critics is, oh, this movie is so challenging. And, you hear this a lot from, like, leftists, and I think about that, and I'm like, challenging to whom? And yes. For whom? Like, and the example I used was something like Get Out, which, you know, I'm not going to pontificate about that movie because it's 4 years old, and it's a good movie overall. And I know a lot of people that say, oh, it's you know, it's cliche, it's full of plot holes, it's not that great. I'm like, it's good. It's at least as good as, like, your old school John Carpenter moralistic horror film.
Sure.
But if you take the core essence of that theme's, that film's theme, like, who is it challenging? It's not challenging someone who goes into that film and already agrees with it, who already agrees that there's this, you know, plague of rich white liberals that just want to, you know, steal black culture and, like, superficially, like, live in it and use it in a way that's abusive and terrifying and harmful to black culture. Most liberals went in and they clapped for that theme. It's like, yes, I am so bad. Tell me. And and the example I gave was like Film Crit Hulk saying it was the best film he'd seen in a decade, and Movies with Mikey said it was he'd never seen a horror film that made him a better person when he got out of it. And I'm like, what the heck are you getting out of it? Like, I mean, I get the idea you're going for, but I'm like, who else is this changing? Is a white supremacist going to watch this movie and change their mind? Is someone who's just doesn't think about these films in this category going to change their mind? I mean, obviously, not saying it's a bad film. I'm just saying, like, a film like that, like, that is that specifically political and on that sharp of an edge. What is it? What needle is it turning? And I was afraid. Do you disagree with me, or?
I'm torn because on one hand, yes, I do think that there's the idea of, like, playing into a left-leaning person's not self-hatred, but, you know, instinct to blame oneself. But I think I know it seems so rudimentary, but I applaud that the film didn't make this a bunch of like Southern conservative racists. You know what I mean? Like, because that's what everybody else does. Like that's the easy thing to do. And the fact that that when it comes right down to it, it was a black filmmaker who, when he decided he wanted to make a movie like this, as his debut, no less, and he chose to aim his set his sights on allies, and say like, hey, I appreciate what you're saying, but slow down. Maybe you're looking to simply use me to make yourself feel good. And even if that does play into, something that like a more liberal critic might already think, the fact that he chose to do that, and you could say challenge, you could say whatever, but like to actually point the finger and say, hey, you know how you think you're a lot better than the conservatives in this regard? Maybe not so much. And I think I appreciate that, because God knows there are so many movies that just play up especially like the Southern racist stereotype, the Republican racist stereotype, all of that it's refreshing to me and challenging to a liberal to see it even vaguely point in this other direction. So I think for some it might be this astonishing experience because they've never experienced it before. You and I experience all the time, movies calling us racist and fascist and all these other things.
But you and I both have the strength of our convictions to know we're not fascists.
Sure. Hang on. I'm
Wait a minute. Who are you accusing here right now?
I'm a teacher, and I'm really trying to get this in classroom fascism thing going. It works out great for me. So don't rain on my parade here.
Okay, fair enough. I'm not going to poop on that parade, but
if there's anything history has taught us, it's that fascism can work for a while. So let's, I'm still in that phase right now.
Yeah, let's. I look forward to the revolution when it comes, but it'll be fascinating to hear about that. But
exactly.
I mean, like I said, I gave you the examples of the two critics who I thought were, they took like something like Get Out and took it to an absolutely sanctimonious degree, which I definitely agree that I'm sure there's someone out there that looked at Get Out and genuinely had a original thought about it.
Yeah.
I'm just very skeptical that that's most people, because I think that most people aren't trained to engage with the arts in a way that actually goes beyond that. There are you can find progressives that they'll engage with a film and they'll plainly say, I'm not religious, I don't share this filmmaker's opinions, but I like the film. There's a lot of leftists who say that about like The Dark Knight, and it's like, this is a film about Bush era politics. Mm-hmm. And I don't agree with everything it says, but it is The Dark Knight, and it is spectacular. Yeah. Or they'll say that about, or like you said, there's plenty of progressives who watch, nominally Christian films like Silencer or Hidden Life, and they get it. Even if they're not religious themselves, they get it, and they're interested in it, and they want to engage with it because they're open to exploring this other way of life. So it's not like these people don't exist. It's like I said, my concern is with the people that do get sanctimonious, and that's not and part of why I'm saying this is just to impress that it's not just a right-wing thing. It's also a left-wing thing. This happens. Right. There's the right-wing anti-intellectual, and there's the left-wing anti-intellectual, and they both have moments that are extremely obnoxious.
Yeah, and and now that you mention it, like I really responded to Get Out for a number of reasons, but I do think that when it comes to like what it's exploring and how it's exploring, it is like sort of basic level analysis and symbolism and that sort of thing. Like it's the kind of thing that can start a conversation very easily, which is something that I'm grateful for, but it certainly is not something that I it's not something like, it's a different genre, but like something like Do the Right Thing, where that actually can inspire debate at the end as to why Mookie did what he did, if he was right or wrong, to what degree is Sal responsible? Did Radio Raheem bring this on himself? Like, there's a lot in Do the Right Thing that talks about race and talks about race relations and does so in a way that isn't quite so clear cut. And to me, it's like Get Out is a good starter for movies that will then go much deeper and don't have such a clear cut thing to say. It's one of the things that, a lot of my conservative friends like have issues with Spike Lee, and understandably so. But you look at Do the Right Thing, it's like that is a movie that is shockingly honest about the complexity of like race relations.
Yeah, I would put that
from a filmmaker that could have very easily just said like, no, it's no pun intended. Yeah, it's just black and white. Like it's so much more complex.
I've seen interviews where Lee is a little bit more didactic on the film's meaning in hindsight, but yeah, sure. I agree. Do the Right Thing. It's for one, it's a much better film than Get Out. Like it is one of the best films of the 1980s. You're not going to get any disagreement on that. And it's probably the best thing he ever did, as far as I've seen.
Oh yes.
So it's anything that can actually get you into that artistic space where there is an element of vagary and where there is an element of, no easy answers, is ultimately going to bring something interesting out of the conversation and actually start a conversation in the first place.
Yeah, and those tend to be, so many other people. It's odd that we're having this conversation because at Battleship Pretension, the topic this week is baby food culture, which is something that a critic mentioned that like he was on it wasn't a critic, it was a director, but I don't remember who it was, but he mentioned being on a flight and like looking at what people were watching on their screens, and it was like, Jungle Cruise and Black Widow, and like these are full grown adults, why are they watching this? And it led to, and then he referred to it as like baby food. And so we had a conversation about that sort of thing. And the whole time I was just like, oh boy, we probably really sound like snobs. But it's like, at the same time, I understand that it's a light movie can be fun. But yeah, something that to use the word challenging, which I think is probably used too much. Like a movie is to me challenging when it forces me to arrive at a place that I don't, maybe not even a place that the film wants me to arrive at, but like rather than just take me by the hand and just guide me to a very clear thematic ending or end point, it instead says like, okay, here's all the elements. How are you going to put them together? And it's like, oh shoot, I don't 100% know how I'm going to put it together. Like my favorite movie of 2018, it was between First Reformed and what eventually wound up being my favorite, which was Annihilation, which you mentioned already. Like a film that I still am not 100% sure what I think the ending officially is from a narrative standpoint. But if I try to look past the concept of narrative and look at it purely from a thematic and visual standpoint and a character standpoint, it's like, oh, okay, I think I've got some ideas there. And it forces me to like use different parts of my brain, not a purely instinctive and emotional part. And there's nothing wrong with acting on instinct, and there's nothing wrong with acting on emotion. I think films usually start with that and then incorporate this intellectualism that requires you to like really engage with it, as opposed to simply sit back and let it happen to you. The ones that I feel like draw me in and ask me to sort of take part in what's going on, those tend to be my favorite of the year, with the exception of 2021, where my favorite movie is Cyrano, which is just such a, in my opinion, like well executed, straightforward musical. But for some reason, it hit all the right buttons for me. Meanwhile, like Licorice Pizza, which I usually love, Paul Thomas Anderson, is a movie that I really liked but didn't necessarily love. So yeah, it can be different, I guess, maybe depending on who I am as a person from year to year as well. But I'm sorry, we didn't get to your, speaking of favorite movies of 2021. I'm curious to hear about your list, even though I could read it elsewhere. I like to hear it from the person.
I did pull it up.
If that's okay.
No, it's fine. It's been out for a month. I always lament when I write these lists that almost consistently every single year the movie that ends up being my favorite movie doesn't end up coming out until after the list comes out.
Yeah.
Which it's consistently happened. Like Silence, Phantom Thread, Never Look Away, and The Father all came out 2 to 3 months after December. And I just ripped my hair out every time I saw it and was like, it's the best thing I saw this year! And it wasn't this year!
Yeah.
And I'm still kind of waiting to see if I get that. Tragedy of Macbeth came very close, but I need to kind of sit on that a little bit longer and watch it again. Just because it's Shakespeare.
Man, it's so wonderful. I loved it.
But not knowing what I consider to be the best thing this year, I loosely, the list is, I put Dune on there, Last Night in Soho, The Vigil. I'm not sure if you saw that, but it's...
I did not.
That was really good. It's basically The Exorcist, but it's from an Orthodox Jewish perspective. So,
fun.
Yeah, it's really good. I put Mass on there, Nightmare Alley, West Side Story, The Last Duel, Macbeth, The French Dispatch, and I ended up going with Pig for my number one, just because I felt like it was the most new feeling film last year.
What a fascinating film that is. Like,
yeah,
it's. I mean, people said that like it seemed like John Wick as far as the concept, but it's like, yeah, but instead of guns, he uses like words and reminds people of their own humanity and passion. Those are his weapons. And what a fascinating film.
Yeah, I think it's kind of brilliant to sell it as John Wick, because then you can, pull... I mean, I don't know if I necessarily support intentionally pulling the wool over an audience, but
right.
I would love to go into an audience for people who only thought that was going to be a John Wick ripoff, and then just watch them slowly realize it's not.
Yeah, it's like he's pretty violent against a car at one point, but that's about it. Yeah, and yeah, like fully like deceiving people, I'm not thrilled with, but there are so many movies of like, older man who's a bit reclusive gets pulled into a deeper plot, and something he cares about is taken from him, and so he needs to deal with it. It's like that itself is its own like subgenre at this point. So like to sort of toy with that and do something different while still being firmly within that is something that I'm totally on board with. Like, and I never felt like the film was like school marmish, like shaming me for wanting it to be something more action packed or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I genuinely didn't know where it was going as it was happening. I mean, at one point I'm like, this is going to turn into a boxing movie, isn't it? And I'm just like, then it didn't. And I'm just like, oh, okay, then it's not that. And then it turned out to be a cooking movie. And I'm like, what the heck? But
yeah, it's a fascinating movie. And you know what, to bring things back to sort of, and I know we should wrap up soon. I'm sorry. Look, I'm a college professor. Clearly I enjoy my own voice. But
it's okay. I'm going to be too drunk to see soon. So
okay. So, because I'm a dad and stuff, I don't really get to, I haven't seen that much. I'm still catching up on stuff. So like, I haven't seen West Side Story, but I know that West Side Story, certainly a number of conservative critics and commentators really like lambasted the film for various reasons. One was like not getting subtitles for the Spanish, and as a result, the film just sort of being labeled like, oh, this is woke West Side Story, woke side story, but yeah, so amongst conservative critics and commentators, Spielberg's West Side Story was just sort of labeled woke because it has a different perspective on casting and that sort of thing. And so once a film is just sort of gets that label attached to it, I definitely feel like a lot of our fellow conservatives are just like, they're not going to be able to see past that. And it can be occasionally off-putting for me as well. I understand that, but like, it sounds as though, to the degree that the film is woke, whatever that term even really means these days, positively or negatively, it sounds as though you were able to see past it and really like it. So what did you like about West Side Story? Again, I haven't seen it, but you know what? Don't worry about spoilers. I've seen it. I just haven't seen this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. I mean, it's just being what it is, late period Spielberg. It is a massive musical from one of the best directors alive. It is a $200 million movie with the full funding of 20th Century Fox behind it, by one of the most talented people alive, with some of our best actors in it. And it's really hard not to get swept up in the spectacle of something like that. And overall, just kind of enjoy the fact that we have a, $200 million Hollywood musical, which, hold on one second. Oh, wait, no. But yeah, a $200 million Hollywood musical. I mean, that's never going to happen again, especially now that it bombed. We're never going to see that again. Now, there were, superficially woke elements, but it was all very surface level. Mm-hmm. I mean, the language thing, it's off-putting, but I was more off-put by the way certain critics were cheering it on, more so than the thing itself. I mean, it's not a huge deal, since there's only maybe like 4 or 5 scenes where they do only speak in Spanish. And I know that apparently that's an element that was brought over by Lin-Manuel Miranda's rendition of West Side Story, because he got famous for rewriting all the Puerto Rican parts back into Spanish, and that was actually before he wrote In the Heights and before Hamilton. So that was kind of his initial claim to fame, was he was just the guy who came up with this really clever idea. It's like, what if we did West Side Story in Spanish? And toast to Broadway now. What are you gonna do? But I mean, anytime a leftist gets sanctimonious on Twitter, it's easy to say this. Okay, you're being dumb. Shut up. This isn't. We're distributing this in a film where 90% of the population only speaks English. It wouldn't hurt to have a subtitled version, but not the biggest problem in the world. And there's also a couple of spurious elements. I mean, they throw in like a transgender character in the 1950s, I'm like, okay, it is what it is. It's a musical. It's appealing to Tumblr kids. And they also bring the subject of gentrification to the forefront. I mean, the movie is basically taking place in a New York City that's being actively demolished in the background. Right. So the implication is supposed to be that these two gangs are fighting because their territory is shrinking, because all these rich people are flooding into the upside of New York, and the west side of New York, and they don't have the ability to be themselves and have their own boroughs and not have to interact with each other. They're being forced together by economic factors, which that's gentrification's a very popular topic point among the left, which it's well explored in something like Blind Spotting, but it's also one of those issues where people get really sanctimonious over it, even though it's complex. Yeah. But, I can look past all that and see that this is, special. I like late period Spielberg, even though he is a extremely sanctimonious and didactic author. Bridge of Spies is one of my favorite movies ever. It is an amazing drama, even though it's sanctimonious. And I even like The Post against my better judgment.
Boy, me too. And
I shouldn't.
There's so much. It felt like a Sorkin movie in not a great way, and yet, like Meryl Streep has some of her best moments ever as an actress in that movie, and it's just like it's hard not to get swept up in that.
I mean, I really,
at least for me,
I mean, I think Bob Odenkirk was really the runaway of that, but like he is just amazing in everything he touches. He just is,
I have a hard time. I know that's dumb of me, but like because I watched Mr. Show and because I think of him as just like a purely or at least predominantly comedic actor, it's hard not to see that. Like even when he's supposed to be like a serious character, like when he showed up in Little Women as a non-comedic character, like the moment he walks in, I'm just like, nah. I just start laughing and I'm like, oh, I'm not supposed to be laughing. Damn. And it's not his fault. He's a good actor.
I just know him as the Breaking Bad guy, so I don't have that problem. Yeah. But that's that's an association sort of thing, so I get it.
Yeah,
he's good. He's okay in Nobody. I mean, that's another one in the old man who wants revenge on something genre. So
yeah, I was. It is interesting. I still, again, have not seen West Side Story. I definitely want to see it before it leaves theaters because I feel like it would be a fun, big spectacle to see. But yeah, late Spielberg is not necessarily my favorite Spielberg. I think the last movie of his that I truly loved was Munich, and I understand that like there's, for political reasons, there's a lot of reasons why I maybe shouldn't like that movie. But I think it's such a fascinating film, like, and such a non-Spielberg movie in certain ways. Like, I really love that movie, but I don't think I've loved any movie. Like, I thought Lincoln was fine. I didn't love it like some people. I was pleasantly surprised by Bridge of Spies. I keep forgetting that he made Ready Player One, a movie I don't like.
As you should.
Yeah, it's, boy, whew.
I mean,
just thinking about it exhausts me.
I mean, Film Crit Hulk had it said it best that Spielberg is in the Frank Capra stage of his career, which... I mean, when you think of him like that, then it suddenly makes a little more sense. I mean, he wants to be he wants to do quiet, moralistic dramas with, big ideas and and not necessarily low stakes, but he's not terribly interested in doing the blockbusters anymore, and I don't think he's well suited to it anymore. Especially after Ready Player One. I'm like, the guy had the opportunity to essentially like close the book on his career on a film, based on a book that's based on every film he's ever done.
Yeah.
And he has no insight to bring to it. I'm like,
yeah. The best part of it was when he does a Kubrick homage.
Yeah,
it seems kind of funny.
Mostly just because they're ripping parts of the book that are tedious out and replacing them with things that aren't tedious. So
yeah. Yeah, I mean, for my money, it's so interesting to see Spielberg go this way when you see where Scorsese is going. They're like, he is an old guy, and he is still. It's as though he's just like, no, I think I still have my best movie inside me. So you get like Wolf of Wall Street and Silence and The Irishman. Like, he's still as ambitious as he ever was, which is just like so exciting to see. But anyway, sorry. We've been going on for a long time. I apologize.
No, it's fine. I mean, I agree on Scorsese too. I mean, there are a few directors that can actually, function at the top of their career in their 70s or even in their 80s, and he's one of them.
Yeah, just constantly, it's just like, okay, I guess I'm 80 years old. I think it's time to just make a bunch of 3-hour movies. That's what I'm gonna do.
Sell them to Netflix because the film industry is screwed and doesn't want to pay for my reunion movie anymore.
Yeah. But yeah, so we bounced around a lot. Obviously, I had no expectation of us getting to the bottom of anything. But yeah, more than anything, it's just it's fun to talk movies with someone. And it sounds so wrong to say, but it can be nice hanging out with someone that you have more than one thing in common with. Sorry, we have 3, because I don't know if you know or not, we have the same first name. I
might have noticed. I mean,
yeah.
The plague of my generation was that every single high school class had at least 3 Tylers in it. So
I did not encounter another Tyler until, although I guess again there's an age difference between you and me. I did not encounter another Tyler until I was like 10 or 11. I was the only one, and it was seen as like a very rare name. And then suddenly It's like we all just found each other apparently, because I know like 3 of them right now.
I mean,
And I don't like any of them.
In my oops, in my senior year film studies class in high school, there were 3 Tylers, and we would consistently play like the prank where we would just constantly change chairs, musical chair style, and while the substitute was in the room, and they never noticed.
You know, the fact that I have identical twin boys, and I hear stories like that, and that's just a similar name, and I'm just like, oh boy, like they are going to play, because I get them mixed up sometimes. I hope that their personalities really diverge when they start to really emerge, because that will help quite a bit, because I imagine they could very easily trick me once they realize, hey, we look alike and dad can't tell. I feel like I'm not going to be winning father of the year once they have that realization.
Yeah, the worst case scenario is when they actively start using it as a weapon.
Yeah.
they learn that they have this power over you, and then they just start like replacing each other and like, you know, wearing each other's clothes and pretending they're each other, and
yeah. It's just gonna be an '80s sitcom, just in my house for like 10 years.
Oh my! But yeah, is there anything else you wanted to bring up, or do you just want to give your shout yourself out?
Nothing I can necessarily think of. Don't get me wrong. I could talk for many more hours, but you're drunk and about to pass out. And,
I've had 2 drinks tonight, sparsed over 4 hours, so I'm not actually drunk, for the record. But
I don't drink at all, so I have recently started, very recently started, like having the occasional sip of whiskey, like high-end whiskey, which is like, but I've never been drunk in my life. I've never been buzzed in my life.
I'm Southern Baptist, which means legally I don't drink, but in real life I drink a lot now.
Oh boy, yeah. I grew up Nazarene, and it's just like, okay, Southern Baptist or Nazarene, which one is more like traditional? Which one is more of a hardliner on like drinking and that sort of thing, and movies? One thing that's fascinating for me is that I grew up in a family that I call very movie positive. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized, like, oh, the Nazarene denomination is actually pretty suspicious of entertainment. And I ran across a lot of people who like weren't allowed any kind of R rating if they're allowed to watch movies at all. And I was like, oh boy, I really lucked out with the parents that I had, because they were pretty cool about it, and they introduced me to movies that certainly my peers weren't going to, like Chinatown and A Fish Called Wanda and that sort of thing.
Well, there you go. I mean, my parents were non-denominational, so but they were pretty strict about what I watched until I was relatively adolescent. So I didn't see a lot of the famous R-rated movies until mid to late high school.
I mean, my parents were protective. Obviously, they're not like letting me watch stuff when I'm like 8. But
no.
Like in my teen years, once they were able to adapt, once they saw what I was watching or what I was interested in, it's like, okay, the kid wants to watch Reversal of Fortune. I don't know if you know what that movie is, but it's the movie that Jeremy Irons won Best Actor for, and it's the story of the true story of Klaus von Bülow, who was found guilty of attempting to murder his wife, and the court case that essentially like reversed that decision. It's the case that sort of made Alan Dershowitz famous. It's a wonderful movie, Reversal of Fortune, from 1990. But like, that's what I was interested in. And I think that's when my parents like, okay, you know what? I think we can give him some leeway, because I don't think he's interested in seeing just sort of like showgirls. Don't get me wrong, I was, because I was a teenage boy. But the stuff that interested me it tended to be a little bit more grown up. Not merely adult, but grown up.
Who plays Alan Dershowitz in the movie?
Ron Silver.
I have a hard time conceptualizing a movie with a fictionalized Alan Dershowitz. I don't know why, but all right.
He's been fictionalized quite a bit, actually. like any OJ related movie or miniseries, Alan Dershowitz shows up because he was involved in the court case pretty early on. But yeah, Reversal of Fortune. I highly recommend it to you and your listeners.
All right, there's your obligatory movie recommendation. But yeah, do you want to just shout out your stuff real quick?
Absolutely, as long as I'm recommending stuff. I recommend. I have a new documentary out called Valley of the Shadow: The Spiritual Value of Horror, which is sort of a video essay style documentary that, by the way, is, as one might assume, given my appearance on this show, it's pretty long. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes, and it talks about the some of the spiritual and non-spiritual deeper themes of horror. And it's meant to just be sort of a celebration of the genre, especially to fellow Christians who are extremely suspicious of the genre. So that's the idea. So you can rent that on Vimeo, or you can it's available on the streaming service Rediscover Television, and so you can find it on there as well.
And he runs Battleship Retention and...
Oh, yes. Yeah, I host a couple of podcasts, Battleship Pretension and More Than One Lesson. More Than One Lesson is film criticism from a Christian perspective. Yeah, I do a lot of things, I guess. And
there are some good clips of him on the Andrew Klavan show that are worth seeking out too. So
thank you.
Yeah, I when were you on last? Because I remember that he put up the clip a couple.
I think it was October. I think it was on in October.
All right, I could probably throw that in the link dump. That's worth seeking out too. But yeah, it was good talking to you again. It's been a while.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and thanks for your patience with my long-windedness, and hopefully your listeners are also that.
Sure, I'm sure they'll enjoy it. Have a good night.
And you as well.
The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions podcast. Editing, producing, and hosting are by Tyler Hummel, artwork by Crystal Cowley, and original music was composed by Melissa Lafira and the late Dan Smolla. Like, subscribe, and please let us know what you think about the show in the comments below if you'd like to see anyone interesting be a guest on the show. Thank you for listening.